Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Poz. With me today, very special guest, wrestling historian. You may know him from the Between the Sheets pod, the new Center Stage Chronicles, or even the Exile on Bad Street, Mr. Kris Zellner. Welcome. How you doing?
Doing great, John. You?
I am doing good. What's going on in your world? I know super busy with all these pods, but what's going on? What's the latest?
Yeah, that's the main thing. We got a lot of podcasts going on. As we are recording this, the latest Between the Sheets Patreon show dropped. As we finished up our two-part series looking at Eddie Gilbert's run in the NWA/WCW 1988 to 1990, and even going into the rest of 1990 when he was in the USWA. And we're looking at how the newsletters covered Eddie, and it's very interesting going back and looking at that because they covered him pretty much unlike any other wrestler in the business at that time. So if you're interested in that type of inside baseball newsletters and how they were covering people, especially their friends, this is definitely a show for you because it's definitely interesting. We have done a lot of shows on Eddie Gilbert and Paul Heyman. They're tied to the hip in a lot of ways. It's like they have their own universe. And these last two shows here are classic Eddie and Paul. And yeah, it's just tremendous stuff in my opinion. So that's the latest thing. And of course, I'll be recording Center Stage Chronicles this upcoming up weekend, our next episode, where we'll pick up after we left off at Wrestle War 89. And probably end up going through the Great American, not Great American Bash, the Clash of the Champions in Fort Bragg in June. So be be on that. And of course, to the weekly Between the Sheets show, which is right now in a 1997-98 run, as we got 1997, SummerSlam 97 on the one that we're recording now. And next week will be 98, which will be Jay Leno or Road Wild. So yeah, I got a lot going on in the podcast world.
A lot of good stuff. Great eras of wrestling for sure. The late '80s and then even into the late '90s. I mean, obviously, great
For
stuff.
different reasons. Yeah.
Yep, love that. You go a little Eddie Gilbert, then you go a little Bret Hart. You know what I mean? You completely changing it up there.
Yeah, well, that's what Between the Sheets is. We bounce around. We'll do 80s one week, maybe do mid 2000s one week. You're just kind of bouncing around, in different weeks and in different years. And we're in our 10th year now. We just started our 10th year. And it's
Wow.
hard to believe that we've done 9 complete years of this show. But Dave Bixby and myself have achieved that, and we're proud of that. So, yeah, it's good stuff.
Awesome. 10 years at anything is amazing, especially podcasting. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
What is your thoughts on Meltzer just in general? Because obviously, you're covering newsletters, you're covering them. Like, what do you actually think of him, his coverage, and everything?
Without Dave Meltzer, we're not here. I mean, let's just be honest with that. The Wrestling Observer spawned off of the fan sheets that were around in the 60s and 70s. I mean, that's what it started out as. Where, there were different fan newsletters that did different things. Some reported, a little bit of news of whatever territory they were representing, or they would do results or different things. And Dave is from that world, which that world spawned Paul Heyman, Jim Cornette, Eddie Gilbert. That that world spawned all these people, and many more that got into the wrestling business. And Dave really started going to a different level around 83 when he started reporting, news more, even though it was still a fan thing. And when 85 happened, when he decided to quit because he got so disgusted with the World Wrestling Federation's rise to prominence, he quit doing the newsletter. And when he brought it back, not too long after he quit, it started taking a different feel as he started becoming more of a newsletter instead of a fan letter. And that's when he really started to rise to prominence. And other newsletters formed after that were like him. Of course, Steve Beverly's Matt Watch, Wade Keller, and The Torch, and everything. And then when Dave Meltzer started working for Frank DeFord at the National in 1990, now he's a national figure. He's starting to appear on, news shows when wrestling comes up. He's the go-to guy. So it's, that early 90s is when Dave, rises to prominence and becomes basically the voice of wrestling in a lot of ways to a fan base that was looking for coverage of wrestling that wasn't in the magazines. They wanted more truth in their coverage, or they wanted that inside baseball knowledge that they weren't getting from the aftermags. And then the rise of the internet just took it to a whole nother level. So Dave's influence is enormous. Whether people like it or not, his star ratings became the litmus test for a lot of fans of what was good in wrestling. A lot of people, take those ratings to heart. They treat them like, say, a Siskel and Ebert movie review or a great music critic or something like that. And they would use that as the standard of what was good and bad. And whether that's right or wrong, it is what it is. But he became that way. But the thing is that I think in recent years, as Dave has gotten more into social media, he's kind of hurt his reputation in a lot of ways with people. And it's sad that it's come to that. And Dave he's not getting any younger, and I think that the way wrestling media is changed in the last 5 years, at least, maybe even close to 10, but that's definitely 5 years, with the rise of other, wrestling news sites like Sean Ross Sapp and Fightful, the name one. It's changed the game because they have a whole different set of sources. It's more younger. It's definitely changed everything as far as the coverage of wrestling today. And Dave is still he's like, the New York Times and stuff like that people are still going to read and still going to, take as, almost gospel in a lot of ways. But his reputation has definitely changed in the last 5-10 years for sure. And it's been interesting to watch.
What do you think about the star ratings? Do you, not like holding like a Bible, but do you pay attention to them at all, or not really?
Star ratings, it's good to see. It's good to see because, okay, this is what Dave thought of this. Or this is what, Wade Keller thought of this. Or this is what, other wrestling reviewers. I remember, when wrestling internet was starting to get real big, Scott Keefe was a big deal for a lot of people. People wanted to see what Scott Keefe had to say about stuff. It's interesting to look at, but it's not, for me personally, it's not going to formulate my opinion. I just use it to say, okay, I need to watch this and see if this is as good as they say it is, or if it's as bad as they say it is. Again, wrestling or any form of entertainment, music, movies, whatever, it's like in the eye of the beholder because people have different tastes. So somebody may prefer, a Hulk Hogan main event that's not this, masterpiece, but it's got, storyline and all that stuff involved in there, and it hooks them. And then you get the people that prefer like a 90s All Japan main event, which is, big spots, head drops, all that stuff. And you got people that prefer lucha, that, want to see that style. It's just, it's what you prefer, I think. But I think people take a lot of that stuff way too seriously, and they'll get upset over a star rating, which I don't get, because that's just that person's opinion. Whether they're right or wrong, it's an opinion. It's not, the gospel by any stretch of the imagination. So it's just, to me, it's just a good thing to have, just to, say, okay, maybe I need to check this out.
I talked to him probably about 2 months ago. We were talking about star ratings and stuff, and I said I just like them so I can know, like, should I check it out, should I not? You know what I mean? Just kind of using it as like a little bit of a barometer, not saying like, oh, I agree or I disagree. I'm like, oh, 4 stars, okay, I'll check it out. You know what I mean? I'll give it my own rating myself, but I won't say, oh, or get mad like, oh, how do you not give that 5, or how is this 5.25, or you know what I mean? I won't use it as so harshly as some people do on the internet.
Well, and the thing I prefer is not the star rating, but like the review of a match itself. I think that's more important than the rating of a match because we've seen that today. Dave will rate matches high today that he didn't like. Like the AEW Blood and Guts match that just happened. He talked about how much he didn't like that match, and he still gave it a higher star rating because he felt he had to. So, I think when I was first really getting into wrestling internet in the late '90s, John McAdam was like the number one tape dealer on the internet, and he on his website when he would do his tape list and stuff, he would always put like little things at their matches and stuff, and a lot of that stuff I thought was as important as anything that Dave has a star rating because it kind of told me about wrestlers and what he thought and the matches and everything. So I took stuff like that more to heart than a star rating personally.
When you look at just the history of Meltzer, obviously he's kind of done it the longest, really, and really the best just as far as keeping everything together. But I do find it funny that people go nuts over the star ratings, but that's like a very small portion of his his job or his role in wrestling. So I always find that funny. Like, people just go nuts over the star ratings. It's crazy.
Yeah, and another thing too that Dave is bad about when, especially back in the day, when he would like give results of house shows and stuff like that, or any show, of course he wasn't at. He would put star ratings there for those matches, where he got the star ratings from the person that sent the results in. So you would have people that not wouldn't even think like that and thinking that's kind of his star rating. So they wasn't seeing that stuff. So Dave is putting some random person's star ratings on there, and people are taking that as the Wrestling Observer star rating for that match. Again, whoever set that in, again, we don't know what their tastes were and if they had some type of agenda against a certain wrestler or whatever. So
Hmm.
that's the thing about star ratings. Again, it's just so subjective.
Big time, man. And obviously, he was not a fan of WWF. So if you go back and look at some of those star ratings from like the Hogan era of the '80s, not very high on a lot of those matches.
And of course, the whole thing with like the junk food dog and the
Hmm.
anabolic warrior and stuff like that. That's it's funny, but you know, it's just some of those things you look at and it's like this is how Dave was a different type of guy back then. And the way he covered that was more the fan letter era where he would do stuff like that, and it is just interesting to look at how Dave grew as the years went on and how he covered wrestling. He got more serious in the '90s when all the controversies came down, Titan Gate, the Vince steroid trial, all that stuff going on. That's when he became more of what we know of as the Wrestling Observer. Is in that early '90s time frame when all that crazy stuff was going on with the WWF mainly. Yeah.
Did you always like subscribe to the sheets and stuff like that, or are you reading it for the first time, or is this kind of like you're going through it again? You getting some stuff you might have missed.
I never have subscribed to a newsletter until I joined the Wrestling Observer website. I never got a print version.
Hmm.
I always had access in different ways to the Observer at times. But yeah, a lot of stuff I never really saw until you know, past decade or so when I had access to these archives of the Observer and the Torch and Matt Watch and random other newsletters that people have put up on random websites, Google Drives, and what have you. And I do the notes for the Between the Sheets main show every week. So I'm scouring through these newsletters and I always see stuff like, wow, I didn't know that, and stuff like that. And the thing about doing doing the Between the Sheets show is you get to see the vast difference in coverage between the newsletters, especially the Observer and the Torch. Because Dave has his way of doing things, Wade has his way of doing things, and like Wade is he's very into stating anonymous source close to the situation. Dave never mentions anything about sources. He just says stuff, so you kind of try to figure out, who's giving the information. Wade is kind of easier when you read between the lines from Wade. Okay, now I know who's feeding this information to him, and just the way everything was covered. I mean, the TV coverage was way different. It was the Torch and the Observer in the in the 90s and 2000s and even today is just so vastly different that it's good that it's like that. It's good that Wade didn't go in direction where it became like a Wrestling Observer knockoff. It's always been different. And in Steve Beverly and Matt Watch, when he had that, around in their late 80s and early 90s, it was more of a media look at wrestling, looking at the wrestling, media side of things, because Steve Beverly was a program director for a TV station in Jackson, Tennessee, and, had a vast background in television. So he had different connections and, that other people didn't have. I mean, Matt Watch is a very vital source for our coverage of the 1989 through 91 version of WCW, because he's got direct lines to the two men in charge, Jack Petrick and Jim Herd, because they treated him as a serious journalist and talked to him way more than they talked to Dave or Wade. So, I mean, that sheet was so important to the coverage of wrestling back then, because you got all this different stuff where you had direct quotes from Jack Petrick and Jim Herd. It's like, wow. So yeah, that era of the newsletters is probably my favorite. Is just watching the growth of the Torch, because Wade started the Torch. He was a teenager. He's like 17, and to watch it grow, watch Dave grow as a reporter, and the coverage of Steve Beverly, which was so different than anybody else's. Yeah, that was my favorite time of the newsletters right there.
When did you actually start becoming a fan? What promotion was it?
Well, I grew up an hour south Atlanta, so my dad, my brothers were big wrestling fans, and of course they watched Georgia Championship Wrestling. We had a weekly Saturday night house show right up the road from where I lived up until 1981, when they just quit running my town because they started focusing more on running northern expansion. So they cut out a lot of South Georgia and Middle Georgia towns, even North Georgia towns. They focused on big towns, not small towns. So I was going to shows as a baby. Of course, I don't remember that, but I was going to shows as a baby. But TBS being the most important channel, in my house, because we had the Braves, we had the Hawks, so, it was so important to my family who are sports fans that, my first memories of television is basically wrestling in a lot of ways. And so my earliest memories is watching Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer on World Championship Wrestling just be a complete maniac, and I was scared to death of him. And, I just remember that and started going to shows when I was 5 years old at the Omni. I went to WF shows at the Omni when I was 5 years old after they took over the TBS time slot. So, and I was going to wrestling matches my whole young life, you know, because where I lived at was like, you know, a central location for all these towns that were getting wrestling because I was, you know, Atlanta's an hour ahead of me up the road. Macon was an hour south of me down the road. WCW TV in all kinds of different places. Columbus, Augusta, Savannah, Marietta. I mean, there's TV everywhere. We had indie groups all over. I mean, Georgia was a fertile ground of wrestling, always has been, and that's where I grew up. And you know, I was lucky to have have TBS, and then we just had a lot of wrestling because Joe Pedicino, when I was almost 6 years old, started up his wrestling block on Channel 36 in Atlanta, and we had wrestling all night every Saturday night. And I think I did a thing the other day where I was asked about, you know, how much wrestling was on I was able to watch on my television every Saturday, and it got pretty much to, I figured it out that it was up to 10 hours.
Wow.
10 hours every Saturday, whether it was from Atlanta stations, Macon stations. I was able to get both. And then there was stuff on Sunday, and then there was stuff during the week. Yeah, so because other stations would play different shows during the week. So wrestling was always on, it seemed like. My life was cartoons, you know, sports, and wrestling. That was my life when I was a kid. So when I was watching TV, when I wasn't outside playing or nothing, but that was my life, and that's what it's always been. Well, cartoons not so much as an adult, and I still love them, but especially the old stuff. But I mean, it's wrestling and sports that's been the dominant part of my life and in my fandom since I was a kid.
Who was your favorite guy? Who's like your absolute favorite wrestler back then?
That's tough. Um, if I mean, I guess to say if I had favorite, um, Road Warriors, Nikita Koloff, even as a heel. I liked. I don't know. Something drew me to those big dudes, those big muscle dudes, and because they just had this intensity. I mean, I like Dusty, love Flair, love Magnum. I mean, I had favorites, but you know, I didn't have really per se a favorite that I latched onto as this is my guy. You know, this is who I'm a big fan of. I mean, I used to get the Pro Wrestling Illustrated and other wrestling magazines, and I would put the posters on my wall, and I had everybody up there. You know, I had all the posters. Sting was a guy when Sting got hot. I mean, Sting was a big deal. Definitely, you know, was into Sting and Luger and the Steiners. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I never really had a particular favorite wrestler. I never in my life have had one I could say, this is the one.
Interesting, though. Those are quite a good group of guys, though. That's for sure. But I love that so many block of wrestling. There's so many hours of wrestling. I love that.
Oh man, oh it was crazy. I mean, there was a time period there in the late '80s where Channel 36 and Channel 69 were competing wrestling blocks on Saturday night.
Wow,
So I
that's
mean
amazing. Yeah.
I was blessed because I was able to see wrestling pretty much from everywhere. You know, we had. I mean, Pedicino was hooked up with WWC in Puerto Rico. So we were getting the English version of the WWC shows from Puerto Rico. I mean, hardly anybody else is getting that, you know, in the United States. We had it. I mean, and we just had all this. I just had all this access to stuff that I was able to see that, you know, I was blessed with when other people that I've talked to that grew up in that same time period and here say I was always jealous of people that lived in that area, you know, because the aftermags like would do a feature on Pedicino's block, and there was like, you know, That's crazy how those fans could get all that stuff and blah blah blah. I lived it. I mean,
Mm.
I was blessed. What can I say? Being a wrestling fan in the Atlanta area.
And you weren't alone because Disco Inferno, I know he always mentions it. The Macon, Georgia, a badass that he is, he always mentions that he had that block of TV of wrestling that he would just watch so much wrestling back then. But yeah, but you guys were lucky to get all that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, not to mention you had wrestling on USA Network, ESPN. The national stuff. I mean, we just had pretty much everything except Japanese wrestling, basically, or lucha airing in this area.
Were you a WWF guy at all, or not really?
I watched it. I enjoyed it. I mean, I always preferred what was on Turner, of course, because it's hometown. It's the home team. Um, but I never was against WWF. I always recognized it was different. Um, I mean, some of my earliest memories is watching WWF because, I mean, my brother, the middle brother, he bought two tapes on VHS that I would watch religiously: Starrcade '85 and WrestleMania 3. He bought them at the stores back in the days when those things cost $40 for a VHS tape, and I would watch those a lot. And then when it got to the point where I had my own VCR, and then I got a second VCR where I could dub tapes, then I would hit my rental stores, and of course, mainly what you're going to see is WF because they put out more tapes, and there was WCW too. So I would just rent tapes and dub them off, and watch them because, back in those days, we didn't have the amount of stuff we can watch now. You kind of were stuck with what you had. I had cable, so I had more channels than some people had, but when I wanted to watch wrestling, I just throw in one of my old tapes and watch, a Coliseum video or old Crockett pay per view or WCW pay per view or whatever, you know. So WWF was different, and I just took it that way. I mean, it was just a different style, and I enjoyed watching it, but I knew it was different. I knew how to take it, compared to some people, So
I feel like WrestleMania 3, pretty awesome show. I love it, but the star rating on the main event, I feel, is very controversial because it might be the most important main event of all time. It should have got maybe a better rating.
again, that goes to the thing. Dave is rating it based on the quote unquote work rate of the match, but the importance of the match, is what it is. So again, it's all how you want to grade, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely. So when you're basically, learning wrestling or really kind of growing up in wrestling, getting into it, you ever want to get in the business per se? Like, was that ever a goal, or just you just love being a fan?
I just love being a fan. I mean, if I was ever going to get in the business, I would, it'd be creatively because I think I have good ideas, but that's just not. I mean, that's not. I don't think I think I want to do, but because I did my share of fantasy booking online over the years back in the day, but no, I've never really wanted to get in the business per se. No, I got a lot of friends in the business. I know how it is. So that's one thing that kind of keep you away. Stay at arm's length sometimes.
Yeah. Oh man, I heard a crazy. We'll get into it. I heard a crazy story about a convention last weekend. A wrestler that I know was there, booked, got there. They flew him in, and they didn't have the money for him, so he ended up going
Oh,
home.
that happens a
Oof,
lot, man. That
oof.
stuff like that happens. Yes, yes, indeed, and that sucks. That really sucks when you have that situation like that. There are a lot of people that do conventions and indie shows that are just shysters. That has happened a lot. We talked about on Between the Sheets. stuff like that happening, especially in like 2000s, where this guy would bring in, these big names. They would get there, and all of a sudden he left without paying them. You know, that's the type of stuff that happens, and it's a shame.
What a crazy business. You know what I mean? Like you can't really trust anybody. It's a weird business, but we love it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching wrestling now for 40 years, and I mean, it's so different now than it was 40 years ago, and whether that's good or bad, it's whatever. But yeah, I mean, wrestling has always been full of maniacs and sociopaths
Mhm.
and good people. But I mean, it's a combination of everything. But hey, that's real life. Real life's like that too.
When you look at current wrestling, do you still like watch as passionately? Are you still like super into it, or are you more like old school is better? I like covering the old school stuff more.
I think that current wrestling. I mean, one thing that I always in my mind, take consideration when I watch stuff is I look at things and this is current. This is what's today. You cannot compare current wrestling with wrestling from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40, 50. Everything changes so much. You just cannot compare. And because everything's so different, the talent's different, the booking is different, the presentation's different. You kind of grade it in the now, and I watch current wrestling all the time. I watch the WWE's programs, I watch AEW's programs. I mean, I keep up with it. I don't watch indie wrestling like I used to. I mean, there's just so much. But yeah, I definitely watch current stuff, and there's a lot of good stuff. It's just it's different. It's different. I mean, the way the matches are worked are different. I mean, I love watching older wrestling too. God knows I love it. I watch it all the time. I'm constantly, watching old stuff too. But I appreciate things differently. It's like the debate you'll get in sports over, especially like basketball these days. So who was the real greatest of all time, Michael Jordan or LeBron James? I mean, it's different eras. You cannot compare the two guys. You know, it's stuff that people want to do because that's the way humans are, but you just can't. It's just hard to compare because of everything that was around. Whether it be the other people involved, them themselves, the style of basketball, the style of wrestling. I mean, everything evolves and changes. Baseball is like the easiest sport to compare past and present because baseball, more often than not, is pretty much the same sport since its existence, other than, juiced up balls
Hmm.
and guys, maybe on steroids or whatever. But still, the rules of the game are pretty much exactly the same. So that's the easiest sport to make those comparisons with. But yeah, I just know how to appreciate things for what they are, now, and appreciate what it was back then. That's one thing about Meltzer that I don't like of his way he does things is his revisionist history, where he talks about, well, this match, yeah, it was 5 stars back then, but now it would be like 4. You can't do that.
No.
You can't go back. It was what it was in that time span. It was what that was then. You know, you can't do that. The match is great no matter what. Like a great movie is great no matter what, or a great song is great, or a great album, a great TV show. TV today is just so advanced. All the stuff they can do now. So it's hard to compare a show from the '60s to a show that's airing now. As far as how they look and everything. And wrestling is the same.
I feel like the star ratings. I mean, it's not really a big deal, but the star ratings now, it's past 5 stars, so it's almost getting a little crazy too.
Well, I mean, Dave did stuff past 5 stars back in the day. It just wasn't. it wasn't harped on much. Like Flair Steamboat in '89,
Oh, yes. Yep.
five plus stars, and he would go on to say when I rated something 5+ stars, it was 5.5 or whatever. I mean, he would do that stuff. I mean, it's there. So, but a lot of that stuff, yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff is he's doing that, to try to, I guess, change the game or try even maybe I don't know if he's trying to make people mad or whatever, but he has his reasons for doing that stuff. Absolutely, but again, that's his opinion, so whatever.
Call me crazy, but I'll stay with Flair and Steamboat as maybe the greatest series of matches over even some great current stuff that I've seen. It's just that I don't know. Maybe I'm more of an old school fan. I can't rate matches ahead of that. That's like the tippy top for me.
And that's your and you know what I mean, and that's great because that's how you feel. I mean, that is your opinion, and you know, there's people that think that you know Omega Nakata. And their series of matches, or Okada Tanahashi in recent memory, they're the greatest of all time. Or anything Masawa Kawada, or anything that happened in Lucha or whatever. I mean, again, that's our opinion, and that's what we think, and that's great that we are able to think differently, because we don't want to be a society where everybody thinks the same. And I think that's the thing today, that people get so upset when other people think differently than they do, more than I've ever seen. And that's not just in wrestling, that's in all forms of culture. We become a world where people get so mad when you don't like what you like. I mean, I don't get it. We have to have different opinions. That is what makes this world what it is. You have to have difference of opinion. You don't want everybody thinking the same. Then we'll be in some Orwellian 1984 thing, and we don't want that.
Right. Well said. I totally agree. I have a buddy of mine he always likes different matches. So I like getting his opinion because then I like to watch. He'd be like, "Oh, you need to watch Speedball versus Osprey from TNA," or "Hey, check out this match." I love that because it's something that maybe I wouldn't have seen normally. So I check it. I'm like, "Oh, that was really good."
You got some people though that they don't really want to go out of their way to check out different stuff. I mean, perfect example of this was in the 2000s, when the indie boom was big and the indie guys were starting to get into WE and whatever. I would try to tell my friends who only watch WE, you need to check out the CM Punk guy. He's going to be a big deal one day, blah blah blah. And they're like, it's indie. I don't want to care about that stuff. I care about what's on national television, or what's the big thing. They didn't want to go out and find stuff like that. And then these guys would come up and go to the big thing. Oh man, you weren't lying. But they don't want to go back and watch that old stuff. It's some people are casual fans and some people are the hardcore nuts. Like we might be. So it's different. It's how different people are in regarding to their fandom and what they like, and that's everything. I mean, you got people that with music, they don't want to go out and listen to this hot indie band or stuff like that. They just care about what's on the radio and the hot singles.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I used to go to a ton of ROH shows. God, but when it first started, that's how I know who Rob Naylor is, your buddy Rob, and how he kind of knows me too. But I always mention those old ROH shows. Like, my God, Punk, Danielson, Joe, Homicide, Loki. I mean, you could just go on and on. All these awesome guys that actually kind of saved my wrestling fandom, because I hated the Ruthless Aggression era. I thought WWE sucked at that point. So ROH and then good TNA matches with AJ and stuff. I feel like the other stuff saved my wrestling fandom in the 2000s.
2000s is an interesting era. I mean, when we do Between the Sheets shows on that stuff, and it's just like, God, this stuff is terrible. And some it's WWE and TNA too, some of that. But
yeah,
the thing is, though, is that it was not good, but it wasn't doing big business either. I think 1999 may be the worst year of American wrestling ever. I mean, as
It,
far as
it's bad.
WCW, ECW, and WWF, as far as wrestling,
Yep.
look at the business.
Yeah, killed
WWF
it.
was just killing it.
Yep.
And I say this a lot on Between the Sheets. When the wrestling is at its worst or de-emphasized a lot of the times, and you're relying on stories and angles, more often than not, that's when the business is at its biggest. Because you're hooking a different type of fan into watching that show that wouldn't be more into the wrestling, but they're into the entertainment part of
Hmm.
it.
Yep.
And that's what that late 90s era did. You know, I mean, the NWO hooked in a lot of new fans. And then, Russo and the Attitude Era hooked in a lot of new fans. And Austin Undertaker and being the highest rated match in cable history, that'll never be topped. Over 10 million people watching that. I mean, it's just, and doing all this big TV ratings and big business. I mean, it was the sports entertainment part of wrestling when it was good and that it good enough to people that were getting hooked to it. I mean, that's what drew the business up. Now, whether people like us that are hardcore fans, like, oh god, that shit was terrible, looking back at hindsight, and it was. But I mean, back then, I mean, that was like the shit. I mean, you were hooked and watching every week.
Hmm. Yep.
So it's interesting to watch the patterns and watch and watch how, especially in these days, I mean, WWE has more wrestling on their TV than they've had in a while, and there's some weeks they don't have as much, but they're doing great at the box office because they have people that were hooked into their stories. And AEW has tremendous wrestling on their TV all the time. Some of the best wrestling you'll see on American television, and great talent and stuff. But the creative is shaky at times, and their live attendances and TV ratings are not the greatest right now. And they're putting on this great wrestling, tremendous wrestling. So, and their fans are more into the wrestling part of the show. So it's just it's good that we have two promotions that are so different, so to speak, in what they do, and the fan bases are different in how they react. So I mean, it's good to you have that dichotomy, but yeah, I mean, we got in that 2000s era when WWE was the only game in town, and TNA was trying to beat WWE, and that's what you don't want. You don't want the competition group trying to be the competition, trying to be the number one. You don't need that. You need to be separate. You need to be different to differentiate yourself, because you come off as a minor league version of the number one company.
Yeah, TNA big time. Look, well, comparatively speaking, did look like like the minor leagues back then. Basically, they never really as successful. Not even like as far as where AEW is today, as far as
Oh
success. I know
no,
it's
no, no, no,
broken
no.
lately, but not even close.
Yeah, well, AEW was blessed to have a TV contract from the beginning. TNA never
Mhm.
had that.
Yep.
And they have the infrastructure that TNA never had too. So they've had a lot of advantages over TNA for sure in their infancy stages. And yeah, they've had their ups and downs, but I mean, you can't deny that they've been extremely successful in what they've done. So in 5 years, I mean, hell, you sold at Wembley Stadium last year, and you're going to do another great crowd at Wembley Stadium this year. I mean, you can't deny their success.
The pay-per-views do probably what 150K per pay-per-view, which is pretty good comparatively. TNA obviously
Yeah,
never reached those numbers, so I mean it's
because yeah,
comparatively good.
they don't have a network like WWE does. I mean, WWE is spoiled everybody because you can watch all their big shows on there for $9.99 a month or whatever it is now on Peacock, because all that stuff's grown up. But so they have an advantage in that way. But people are willing to drop $30 or whatever, however you pay, whether you watch it on online or on regular television, on pay per view. That they've got a fan base that's willing to pay, and that's great that people are willing to do that to watch their shows. And more often than not, their pay-per-views are fantastic as far as wrestling. So you get your money's worth, that's for sure. Which that's one problem you had back in the '90s with WCWF pay-per-views was you had these pay-per-views and they would just not be good. I've watched many a shitty pay-per-view in my lifetime, believe me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh,
Almost some of them were like just TV shows, basically. Like that could have just been a Raw, you know what I mean, or a Nitro or something. Yeah, they weren't pay-per-view quality.
I think that's kind of a problem that we have in today's wrestling, especially WWE. They do a lot of stuff on TV that they still do on their big shows, and not as much now, I guess, as it was at one point. Because remember, I mean, there was that point there in the 2000s and 2010s where the same guys were wrestling each other every week, even on the pay-per-view shows. And it's like, God damn, I mean, how many times can I watch Dolph Ziggler and Kofi Kingston have a match?
Right.
And then we had the joke of John Cena and Sheamus. I mean, all the times they wrestle each other, or Cena and Orton, or whatever. And it's like, God, they're wrestling on TV, and now they're wrestling on pay-per-view. Why should I want to buy the pay-per-view when I've seen them wrestle on TV numerous times? So that the difference in wrestling television since the Monday Night Wars, where you have to put on big matches on TV all the time, basically, to draw that rating. When I grew up and into my high school years, wrestling television was mainly squash matches. I mean, it's a big change, a big shift in wrestling, and that started with Nitro and Raw becoming what they were in the mid-90s.
Crazy that Vince, if you think about it, right, for like 20 plus years, he was just awful. Like the booking was like terrible. Like he beat WCW and was just like, all right, let's fold up shop here. I don't know, just creatively for 20 years they were so bad. Basically until AEW came.
Well, I mean, they had no threat. When you have no threat, you get complacent. I mean, they had some good times. I mean, they had their runs where they had some really good stuff, but yeah, and another thing too is Vince's decline, his cognitive decline over the years definitely showed, especially in recent years before he was exiled. That I mean, it just got out of hand, and it definitely affected the television. I mean, when you're constantly rewriting shows, I mean, look how they did WCW, towards the end, where they're just constantly rewriting television as the show's on the air. If you're doing that, that's not good. You need to have a plan going into your TV show and stick to that plan. Not rewrite the TV show as the TV show's on the air.
Yep.
I mean, that's not good. And WWE was able to skate for a long time because they had no threat. And as that was going on, their business went down and down and down. And again, they had their stretches where they would come back up. But this new era that they've had, where they've done these different things and all this stuff, and the bloodline getting hot and Cody getting hot and all that stuff, and TV ratings going up, attendance is going up. I mean, they've been in a strong run right now, and we're about to soon get Roman Reigns return as a babyface, which would be extremely interesting to watch how that plays out. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be they've been kind of like treading water lately, but it's gonna be something when he comes back as babyface to see how that works and how that goes business wise. So I think it's gonna be a big deal. And them going to Netflix, I mean, that's a game changer. That is a complete game changer. Raw going to Netflix, because not everybody would be able to watch it around the world at the same time on Netflix. And just that access that you now have with them, it's just an immense thing that they got going on. So Yeah, it's gonna be interesting times in wrestling ahead. AEW's TV deal, will get done soon, and we'll see how that goes. Way it looks, Ring of Honor will get a TV show on Turner Networks, so that'd be good for them to have that, and have that comfort of having that deal done and going from there and becoming profitable for the first time. So the rest of this year, 2025, definitely interesting times for the wrestling business. Absolutely. And, watching how it's covered in the wrestling media and everything, I mean, hell, today as we record this, we had the whole thing with the picture of Tony Khan and Shane McMahon, for God's sake.
Yes, I was going
I
to ask you
mean,
that. Yes.
it's wild times in wrestling. Absolutely.
You think that's going to lead to anything, or is they're just talking?
That was not going to be out there if it wasn't for a reason. Something will happen, I'm sure. What? I don't know. Whether it's going to be good or bad, I don't know. But something will happen, I'm sure, because that's not going to get put out there for nothing. No way.
Pretty crazy. Pretty surreal, actually. I know anything could happen in wrestling, but I mean, that's pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, Shane being exiled from the McMahon family, so to speak, as regarding his role in WWE, him still wanting to be involved in the wrestling business, probably, maybe. I mean, that's the only way he can be involved is working with Tony Khan in whatever fashion.
Man, if you're TKO, you better scoop him back up right now. Don't let him go.
You know what? I don't think they think like that. I think they're in a position now where they don't worry about that. I think they're so confident in what they're doing and how they're doing business. I don't think they worry about that. I really don't. And and you know what? They may not want anything to do with a McMahon other than Stephanie. But Stephanie's been so kind of, I want to say vocal against her father, but it's known how she feels. So it's kind of different. But I don't think they want Vince's son around. I don't think they want anything that would have people think of Vince McMahon because they're trying their best to whitewash him from their current scene.
Man, it would just be nuts, though. Shane showing up in AEW or maybe even being a part owner or something. That just would be crazy. It'd be cool, but it'd be crazy.
I don't think he'd be part owner. I think he would be definitely a character, maybe playing some type of authority figure or ownerish type. If that happened, probably definitely in something involving the Elite. If that was to be, if that's still going on, if he ever does come in, I mean that's the way to go. Again, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it'll work or not. I mean, it's a risk to see if their fans would take to something like that.
Definitely get attention, though. Definitely, yeah. The sheets will definitely be covering it like
People,
crazy.
yeah, it's a stunt, so to speak, and we'll see. Well, I mean, the Tony Khan angle was a stunt, with them attacking him, running NFL draft where he was in a net brace.
Yep,
it didn't work. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's definitely got people talking, but I think we're in our own bubble sometimes enough to not see what's really going on and to see that is this really a big deal or is this just a big deal to people like us?
Yeah, true. I feel like to me, I was shocked, but I'm like, man, that's crazy. What the hell is Shane McMahon doing?
Well, it's been kind of teased, numerous times in recent weeks that there was something there, and then that comes out. So, yeah.
As we hit the wind down, head towards the finish here, give us a little bit of recap on all the shows you got going on with Rob Naylor and obviously with Bix as well.
All right. Let's start with Between the Sheets, the main show, which is every Monday. We come out with that. and where we look at a week in wrestling history. And like I said, as we're recording this, the show we just finishing up recording is 1997, the 1st of August that week, where it has SummerSlam 97, featuring Bret Undertaker, Shawn as referee, Stone Cold getting injured in the Owen Hart match, then Shawn turning heel on Raw, and big promo, and then Luger beating Hogan for the WCW title on Nitro. We get into that, and whether that was the right move, the wrong move, should it have happened, what they should have done, should they have kept the title on Luger? We go into all that, and yeah, so we have those shows going every Monday, and that's free on our website, which is hosted by Red Circle. So you can find there on Google if you want to go that way, and yeah, so that's every Monday. BetweenTheSheetsPod.com if you want to go there for that. That'll direct you to Red Circle. Then we have a Patreon show that we put out at least one a month at patreon.com/BetweenTheSheets, which is the Eddie Gilbert stuff, which we just talked about earlier in the show. And we're going to start a new series in August where we look at 25 years of the countdown to the Millennium Man, Chris Jericho, and his interest into WWF and how that was covered at the time in the newsletters. And that coverage actually starts way earlier than people might think. I mean, we actually are going to start in fall 1998 with discussion of that. So should be very interesting 2-part series as we look at that. And we got a lot of shows up. We've done almost 8 complete years of that show, and $5 a month. You put that down and it gets you access to the entire audio archive that we've done in almost 8 years. I mean, we've done tons of shows on all kinds of topics, whether it be WCW, whether we talk about the sale of WCW that went wrong. We look at the Russo era of WCW. We have other random WCW shows. ECW, lots of ECW shows. ECW on TNN, Def VCW, that type of stuff. Of course, a lot of WWF shows. Titan Gate, we did a big series on that everybody loved a lot, where we looked at the Mel Phillips, Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin scandals and all that stuff. And we've done all kinds of other shows like that. And just random other stuff. Global Wrestling Federation. We looked at the history of Global and all kinds of other shows. So tremendous audio, $5 for a whole month. You get, a lot of audio. And, if you want to keep going, that'd be great too. That's part of it if you want to do that. And we have annual, which is 16% off of every tier. So that'd be on a $5 tier, that'd be $50.40 for a year. Save 16%. So again, a great deal there. And then Center Stage Chronicles, which is a show that I do once a month, where we look at the history of the NWA/WCW. We started in January of '89. And we're now on our 3rd show. And like I said, we're going to pick up after Russell War 89 in Nashville, which is the Final Flair Steamboat match, Big Terry Funk angle. And we're going to go probably to the Clash of the Champions in June in Fort Bragg, which had the big Luger turn. We'll talk about that. And our goal is to do a monthly show covering everything NWA/WCW until basically the Nitro era. Because everybody does podcasts about Nitro and Raw and that era, and we'll probably cover the first part of Nitro, probably through the end of '95 maybe. But everybody does podcasts and stuff, but there's not enough podcasts out there about WCW when it was WCW, in that early '90s run. So we take a look at that, and it's a different show that I do with Rob Naylor and a good buddy Charles, who lost on Pro Wrestling Only and has the Wrestling Playlist Twitter account. And we look at it a different way. It's not, like a Between the Sheets type show where we go, deep into the news part. I use the news as like a guide to what we talk about, and it's a very fun, loose show, and a lot of people enjoy it, and I'm glad. And I'm finally glad to do a series like this because I've been wanting to do it for years. And yeah, it's good stuff. So that's the main thing. Exile on Bad Street, I do on occasion, but doing all these other podcasts is kind of, wean that down some, where I don't have the free time to do that. Plus, stuff I do, I have a regular job that takes up a lot of time. So I try to do them when I can. My solo show, which I did that for Between the Sheets. So that's been going on for 10 years plus now. So yeah, I mean that's what's going on. Everything, like I said, is on betweenthe-sheetspod.com off Red Circle. So you can find all that stuff there.
And social media, where can everybody follow you?
At Kris Zellner on Twitter. Yes, that's where I'm at. And of course, BT Sheets Pod for the podcast account. So yeah, you can check me out there. That's where I'm mainly am at. I don't really do Facebook anymore, so that's where I'm mainly at. It's on Twitter.
All right, awesome, Kris. Thank you so much for all the time. We got to get you back on sometime down the road as well, for sure. Thank you so much for all the time. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, John, for having me.